Mahina, and welcome to Voices of Truth One-on-One with Hawaii's Future, brought to you by the Kiwani Foundation. I'm Ehu Keikahu Cardwell, and here we are today, high up in the hills on the island of Oahu. We got a great guest on the show. Let's go on over here and meet him. Kyle,
hey,
aloha.
Aloha. How are you?
Good, how are you? Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Kyle Kajihiro. Did I say your name right?
That's right.
Wonderful. And Kyle, tell us where we are right now.
Okay, we're up on the Halava Heights.
Way up above.
And we're right next to the Camp Smith, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Pacific Command.
Okay, and what are we looking at here way down in the distance? This is quite a view.
Right, so we're looking down on Ke'awalau o Pu'uloa, or what most people might know as Pearl Harbor.
Aha.
But its true name, or one of its true names, is Ke'awalau o Pu'uloa. Waimomi would be another name.
Those are the old names,
the old names, the original names that Hawaiians gave to this place.
Wow.
And you know, you can sort of see the geography of the harbor, the channel coming in from the ocean.
Yeah.
It sort of opens up, and so it's protected. Military surveyors, I guess you would say, they came into the islands. They look at this and they're seeing something different than what the Hawaiians would see. In 1872, 1873, there was a expedition led by General John Schofield and Colonel Burton Alexander, and they were disguised as tourists. They said it was a pleasure visit. They were cruising around the islands, but secretly they were sending back dispatches to Washington reporting on suitable sites for military outposts.
So they were surveying the land, the real estate as it was.
That's correct.
Wow.
And so if you can imagine, you know, Schofield and his party sort of coming upon this view, looking down at Ke'awalau Pu'uloa, and what they're seeing is a harbor for the extension of U.S. military power.
Gotcha.
Right, so the wheels are already turning about how they're going to get control of this place. This is still under the Hawaiian Kingdom. Kalakaua is the king, right? And the sugar industry is starting to develop. And so they use that, you know, the elites in Hawaii, the Haole business owners, want to sell their sugar to America, but the tariffs are a barrier. And so we have one of the early free trade agreements, if you will, right? Where the United States says, well, we'll lower our tariffs for Hawaiian-grown sugar if we get access to Ke'awalau o Pu'uloa.
So that was the trade.
So that was the first undoing of Hawaiian sovereignty over this resource here, That was the first treaty of reciprocity.
Yeah, and they said yes, didn't they?
And they did. And, you know, Kalakaua was chastised by the Hawaiian people. I mean, there was a lot of dissent about cession of Pu'uloa to America, because I think from the Maka'ainana, right, the people who
the commoners
who fish, farm this area, they realized the value of this resource for their survival, for the health and welfare of the nation.
Yeah, because Kyle, wasn't this area down here at Pu'uloa, wasn't this a huge breadbasket area that fed tens of thousands of people that lived in the area in old times?
That's right. This is one of the largest estuaries in the Pacific. It brings water together from two mountain ranges. There's, I forget how many streams that converge into Pu'uloa. So you've got this mixing of fresh and salt water, which, you know, as we know, these wetlands are some of the most productive biological areas on the planet.
So this is like a huge supermarket for the people that lived here.
It's a refrigerator for the island of Oahu, the Ewamoku. There were something like 36 fish ponds reported from this area.
Wow!
So if you can imagine the productivity of this body of water.
Wow!
And you know what has become of it, though, is really tragic. Now we have something like 748 contaminated sites that the Navy has documented in the Pearl Harbor complex.
748 contaminated documented sites just right there,
right? Which
used to be.
So within 100 years, right, it was once the food basket of Oahu. It's now become a place of creating war and practicing for war, and all the costs and environmental and
toxins and toxins, contaminations.
And you know, and the fact that they put up signs that say, you know, don't eat the fish, don't go swimming in here, doesn't stop people who are in need, right?
Sure,
You've got a lot of subsistence fishing that still happens in this area, and what are they putting into their bodies?
And this is a great view up here. But can we go down there and get a better view, go down the hill and see what's down there?
Yeah.
Great. Let's go ahead and do that.
Sure.
Kyle, where are we now?
Well, okay, so we're down at the shoreline of Aiea Bay, on the waters of Ke'awalau or Pu'uloa. To our right, you can see the little point that sticks out. Right now, it's called Magru Point. It's a naval housing facility, but that was an ancient fish pond there.
Wow.
And some of the Hawaiian civic clubs in this area have wanted to begin restoring it, but it's been some difficulties, I guess, negotiating that. The old stories said that Pu'uloa was so abundant. There were many different types of shellfish. There were opai, shrimp, the mullet, the ava, and it was famous for the pipi, the Hawaiian pearl oysters, which were so plentiful. And Hawaiians at that time didn't necessarily use the pearls as much as eat the flesh.
Yes.
And use the shell for ornaments on sculptures, and also for fish hooks and lures and things like that. And so, you know, that was the story of this place, the Ia Hamauleo, the fish that silences the voice, because it was said that if you spoke while you were harvesting pipi, they would close up and they would disappear.
So you had to be
So
quiet.
you had to be quiet.
Wow.
A few years ago, there were biological surveys of the waters of Pu'uloa, and the biologists could not find a living specimen of the pipi.
Really? They were all gone.
Extinguished, yeah.
Wow.
So, and it was a combination of factors, right? It was the discovery of pearls that led to overharvesting. It was the deforestation of the uplands for sandalwood and cattle that caused runoff, which sedimented the reefs.
They poisoned them, huh?
Well, it basically smothered the reef.
Ah, it got smothered by the sediment.
And then the militarization, the dredging, and the introduction of invasive species, it just changed it. If you look at here on the shoreline, it sort of shimmers with a lot of these white flakes.
Yes, I see that.
These are all fragments of the shells of the shellfish.
Wow.
And if you look at the sediment here, it's all embedded.
It's all in here.
It's all embedded.
Look at that. Wow.
And so if you just dig a little bit,
Yeah.
you can see this is these are the hinge portions of the pipi. This would have been a much larger shell.
Like about that big,
About
maybe,
this
right?
big, right.
Yeah.
And there's thousands of them.
Oh, look how deep it goes here. That's amazing.
There's thousands of them. So these are all the hinges of the pipi shells. So you can imagine how much was in this area.
Yeah, I see that.
And here's another type. I don't know what this is named, but look at how thick this shell is.
Wow, very thick, very strong.
And we don't see those here anymore. So this tells you something about, you know, the importance of this place, the Kanaka Maoli.
This gives you an idea of how much food was here, yeah?
That's right. That's right. And now there's not a single one of these living that exists.
Everything is just like this, dead.
Yeah,
Gone.
yeah, fossil.
Fossil.
Right.
Fossil,
Right.
just a remnant, just a memory.
Right.
Wow.
These shells are maybe at least from the 1840s, because that would be the last time when there were recorded abundance of the oysters.
Wow.
And at that point, you know, when they were harvesting for pearls, a lot of that would have been wasted. This resource would have been wasted because they were just opening them up and looking for these pearls, and they only got a small amount. When we do our tours for folks, we try to explain the significance of this place, but also to juxtapose, right, the significance to Native Hawaiians.
Yes.
And what it's become today. Across there, you see the Arizona Memorial, the War Memorial.
Yep.
The USS Missouri.
Yep.
And so they form sort of bookends to World War II, right? The beginning of the war, an act of treachery by Japan,
right.
And the end, this sort of triumphalist, destruction of Japan, and symbolized by the Missouri. In that story, you know, what's so tragic is that the story that we're talking about here is lost, right? It gets just overwritten and erased from memory. So
nobody hears about this story over there, is what you're saying.
And about the centrality of Pu'uloa in the imperialist imagination, right? And in its function as a part of this extension of empire in the Pacific. And so we're trying to expand this story, not to say that the American story, the story of the war, is part of it, but it's a much bigger story that extends into the past and also looks into the future. if we remember Pearl Harbor as only a place to remember war, what decisions will we make on that basis, as opposed to remembering this as a tragedy and a memorial to peace?
Yeah.
If it was a peace memorial, how would it be different?
Yeah.
What decisions will we make differently? I think that's something that we have to be content with as we look to the future for Hawaii, right?
Yeah. So Kyle, who takes the tours to? Who do you give tours to?
Oh,
here?
we take school groups on these tours, and sometimes visiting guests. We'll take them around to just explain, try to illustrate in the physical place where it happens some of the events in Hawaii's history and the different complexities, I guess, of our story.
And so, what's their reaction when they begin to hear this stuff?
I think it sort of blows people's minds to realize, one, just how massive the military presence is, and yet it's hidden in plain sight.
Yes.
I think that's the thing, is that we're trying to peel back the curtain to get a glimpse of these mechanisms, these infrastructures of power and control that exist in the midst of everyday life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we take it for granted, we become numb to it, but it's had tremendous impacts on the environment, on the people, and on our future. And I think we need to, in order to make good decisions, we need to be mindful of that history.
One thing I think a lot of people don't realize, don't know about, is that Hawaii is literally the most heavily militarized piece of real estate on Earth. Yes?
I think that's been said about Hawaii. I think it's maybe debatable if it's demilitarized, but I would say one of the most militarized.
Wow.
There's certainly places, in the war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan that are intensely militarized. There are other islands like Guam and Okinawa that are also heavily militarized. And I think the percentage of land under military control in those areas is a little higher than here. But Oahu Island is like 22.4% controlled by the military.
So almost a quarter of all real estate.
Almost a quarter. Signs are all up around the harbor, but it's a restricted area. So this is the anomaly, the contradiction in Hawaii, is that we have a really strong public access laws for the beaches and shorelines.
Yes.
Everywhere, right?
Yes.
There's public access. Even if you have a private home, they have to create a little right-of-way for people to get to the beach.
Yes.
Except on the military bases. So Makapu, Kaneohe Marine Base is fenced off and you can't get in there. Pu'uloa here, even though we have access to the shoreline, you set your toe in that water and technically you're trespassing in federal property.
Really?
So everywhere else, the submerged lands are considered ceded lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom that were, acquired by the United States. In this case, it's considered U.S. federal property and you'd be trespassing. These signs are put up by the State Department of Health after the Navy had done some sampling and testing of the sediments and the waters of Pu'uloa, and I mentioned something like 748 sites were identified.
Yes.
Including, the sediments, the contaminated sediments. And so there's everything from mercury to lead and arsenic, oil and petroleum products, jet fuel, diesel fuel, solvents such as perchloroethylene, carcinogens like the PCBs and dioxins. Many of these things are flowing into or in the lands adjacent to Pu'uloa.
So, Kyle, how did they get here? Where'd they come from?
Of course, there's multiple sources of some of these contaminants, right? The runoff from the roads and so forth. But the majority of it came from the military activity in this area.
So from right out here?
Well, so in Pearl Harbor Naval Base, there's oil slicks and fuel spills that sit on top of the water table that sort of move around in the porous rock underneath. Tide comes in, tide goes out, and this stuff's just sitting there. And they've been doing, there is a program to do cleanup of bases. It's started in the 70s and early 80s, and they're slowly chipping away at the problem, but it's a huge problem. And I've seen places in Pearl Harbor where oil is oozing out of the ground, and they have to put a boom to contain it as it's seeping out.
Really?
And they're trying to pump it out. A little while ago, we drove down from Camp Smith down to this park, and we passed an elementary school, IA Elementary School.
Yeah.
Just across the street is a vacant lot. There used to be a Navy facility. There's a diesel fuel plume under water table underground there. And so there's a pump that's situated there. They're continually pumping out diesel fuel, trying to reduce its impact. And there's also a plume of perchloroethylene. It's a carcinogen. That plume is floating around under the ground, and they've drilled sampling sites all the way out into the water here in the shallow waters.
Right here.
Perchloroethylene in this area.
Wow. So
this reflects that problem of the contamination that's accumulated in this area, and there's no immediate plans to remove it. They don't have the ability in some cases to remove all of it.
So it may never go away.
Well, I think nature is resilient. I believe that time and natural, forces can remediate some of these problems, but it's going to take a while. And if humans don't, remove as much as we can from the environment, it makes it much harder for nature to fix it. In the case of this plume, the course of action the Navy took was called monitored natural attenuation. So monitor to watch it, and natural attenuation to let nature take its course. So they're doing that anyway as a sort of certified a remedy for these spills.
Probably because they have no other choice, right?
The cost, they're always factoring in, well, how much is it going to cost? How much threat is it to the public health? And then they come up with some point where they say, this is what we're going to do about it.
Right.
So in that case, they're just letting nature take its course. But I think there's other things that could be done, including removing some of the contamination sources. Over a few miles down this way towards the Manana Peninsula, there's a old landfill site in an area where the military burned waste and then left the ash there. So that was an old fish pond site, and it's now closed off as a landfill, but it's just being left in place, and it's possibly it's leaching out. We don't know what's happening, but those are some of the places where maybe it ought to be removed in order to reduce the potential for things being released and increasing the potential for those lands to be cleaned up at some point. But right next door we have springs that are still flowing, and some of our friends are trying to restore taro farming and other kinds of agriculture right in the shadow of these contaminated sites. I like to see this place be a peace memorial, so that the study of how do we prevent wars from ever happening again. The militarization of Hawaii brought World War II to our shores. So is there another kind of way that we can have peace and security through human solidarity, for example, so that we don't have these tremendous and unacceptable costs of militarization?
Wow. And
because we're seeing the limits of that trajectory already. Wow. In Okinawa, in Guam, in the Marshall Islands, in Korea, the human and social and environmental costs of militarization are just exorbitant. And who pays the price and who gets paid, who makes a profit, are not the same people, right? The business people, the 1%, the defense contractors, the war profiteers, they get paid when this kind of militarization happens. But who pays the price? It's the folks who relied on the fisheries here, right? The native people of the land, whose lands get taken away, whose sacred sites get fenced off or get obliterated by training, right? Those are those who are paying the price for all this prosperity, so-called prosperity.
Wow. This whole area can be restored back to what it was, yeah?
Well, I mean, I don't know that anything can always revert back to something that was. I think history is dynamic. But I think that we can restore a more balanced natural system if the choices we make now lead towards the cleanup and restoration, lead toward sustainable stewardship practices, lead towards priorities that emphasize, environmental harmony between people and nature, social harmony between groups, so that we're not using force as the gun to the head to get our policy effective. Right?
Yeah.
Essentially, this is what Pearl Harbor represents, a gun to the head of the rest of the Asia Pacific. Now, is that the kind of relationship that Hawaii wants to have with the rest of the world? right? We are the great gun that coerces others to doing the United States will? Or should Hawaii become a partner in a community of nations and peoples trying to figure out how to get out of this mess that our planet is in? Right?
Yeah, very good. So, Kyle, how can we make better decisions in the future regarding all this?
Well, one, I think we need to stop chasing the addiction to military spending. We've become addicts, I think, to use that metaphor. Military money is a huge part of our economy, there's no doubt about it, right? But there are huge costs that come with that. And so with any kind of addiction, you know, you feel good at first. Whenever you get your fix, it makes you, feel invincible. And then when you're coming down, you need that next fix even worse. And it takes a toll on your psyche and on your body. And if you look at military, and I would include tourism type of spending and priorities as the economic fix that Hawaii's based on, right? That infusion makes you feel good, but you can't sustain that high forever, right? And it is taking a toll on our body and on our psyche. Who have we become as people here? Have we become, shaped by this militarized culture, these military priorities, or are we charting our own course based on, what is pono, what is the best and most balanced and just relationship to have with each other and with the land?
So how can we begin to make better decisions towards those things you just mentioned?
Well, again, I think one, we need to recognize there's a problem.
Okay.
If we go with the addiction model, right, the first step is always to admit that we have a problem.
Right.
And then it's to start weaning ourselves off of that and investing in other alternatives. There are other alternatives to, growing food. Why are we importing 90% of our food when we have such productive lands?
When we have this,
we have these resources.
Yeah.
Right? And so, the island sustained a population that's almost equivalent to what it is now prior to contact, based on the resources of the land. They had very intensive and very efficient, ecologically and economically efficient sources of getting food, right? Agriculturally and aquaculturally.
So if they did it before, we can do it again.
We could revive some of that knowledge and reconfigure it for our times.
Yeah.
We're going to need it, right? I mean, we're going to need to have technologies of how to sustain, ourselves in an age of dwindling resources, in an age of ecological crisis, it can be based on this model of continuous expansion and extraction and exploitation of resources. The Earth is finite. That's something that living on an island, I think, taught Hawaiian people. Island people have a sense of the resources being finite, and so therefore you have to find a balance in how you live within those means. The Earth is an island. What is the limits of that resource, and how do we live in harmony with it? We have to find a way to do that.
Wow, that's wonderful. And there we have to leave it. Kyle, mahalo for being on Voices of Truth. Thanks so much for your wonderful message, and all the information has been great. And to our viewers, mahalo to you for joining us on Voices of Truth One-on-One with Hawaii's Future. Remember, you can watch us on the web 24/7 on voicesoftruth.tv.com. I'm Ehu Kahu Cardwell for the Kiwani Foundation. And until next time, ahui ho! Mahalo for watching Voices of Truth One-on-One with Hawaii's Future. Watch us on the web 24/7 at voicesoftruth.tv.com. You'll find all our shows, including this one, in case you want to see it again or share it with family and friends. Also view our weekly video commentaries at freehawaiitv.com. And check out our blog, published daily, at freehawaii.info. It's all part of the Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.